Hello, this is Brandon Poliad for the CET once again. We're going to continue our conversation about outcomes, but this time we're going to look at how to attach outcomes to quizzes. Now, we're only going to cover for now the regular quizzes tool, not quizzes.next. One caveat, if you're using quizzes.next, you can attach an outcome to an individual question. However, it does take 24 hours in order for that data to move from Canvas into quizzes.next. I know that Instructure is working day and night to make improvements to quizzes.next, and so hopefully that time is cut down significantly, but for now we're just going to cover quizzes. Okay, so if you didn't watch my first video and you're lost about what this looks like, you may want to go back and check how to get outcomes into a course. For now, we're going to jump into quizzes. I've already got my 3 outcomes here that are institutional competencies, and we're going to attach them to some question banks using quizzes. So if I go into quizzes, you'll see I've already got a quiz put in there. Now, you can attach rubrics to quizzes, which to me is a little bit interesting. That's not necessarily the way that I might recommend doing things. I would actually go into quizzes here. Up on the right-hand side, this little kebab over here, next to plus quiz, you'll see manage question banks. Now, every question is in a question bank. A little bit different than D2L where you had to add them in. Every question is going to be in a question bank within your course. Now, you can only attach outcomes or align outcomes, meaning our institutional competencies or those you create for your individual course, to a question bank using the original tool. So if I click on that name, you'll see here's the question that's inside. If you want more details, you can actually click Show Question Details. There we go. My wonderfully phrased question here, what is weather? And you'll see on the right you can actually align outcomes to question banks. And so if I do align an outcome, maybe I want to do the first criterion of the contribution, collaboration rubric, and here we go, it's contribution. You get to set a mastery score on this. So we're not actually ranking these. It's going to be the score on that question bank. So if we're only pulling one question, your options are pretty much 0 or 100 unless you are manually grading. Okay, so you get to set this threshold, but know that the number of questions you pull from a bank dictates how many questions they'll have to get right to reach that threshold. So if you have 10 questions, for instance, and your threshold is 60% of those questions, well, then they only have to get 6 out of those 10. But say we make it 75, and then you only have 5 questions, right? Well, that means they have to get 4 out of 5 correct in order to reach that 75% cutoff. So just be aware of how many questions you're going to pull from your question bank and set this number accordingly. So I'm going to say 100. I want them to get all the questions from my bank correct here. I can then click import. It gives me this warning again. I click OK, and there we go. Over on the right you can see here is IC-08.01 contribution, mastery at 100%. So it does give me some context for what is aligned with a particular question bank. Now you can do this for multiple question banks, which might be how I would recommend doing that. So if I go in here and I'm just going to call this subject 2. I'm going to edit this and I called it outcomes. We're going to call this subject 1. And so we're testing on competency based on these different subjects. You can go by week, by exam, by whatever you need to do, but realize that with the original quizzes, you can only align outcomes to individual question banks. So let's go here. We're gonna copy a question over from here. We want to put it here, keep a copy here, move copy. Perfect. Now I have something in this. And so if I look at subject 1, you can see over on the right, I've got aligned outcomes over here. If I go back using the breadcrumbs up top, subject 2, I have that same question because I copied it, but I don't have any outcomes. If I want to align it, I come over on the right-hand side, click Align Outcome, click whichever outcome I want, set my mastery level, and then click Import, and hit Return or click OK. Now, the easiest way to do this is actually, if I go back into quizzes, let's click over here into quizzes. So we've aligned outcomes with the correct questions, which we have placed in discrete question banks. If I go into my quiz and edit it, I can actually look at questions. I'm gonna remove this on here, and it's gonna say, "Are you sure you want to delete this question?" I say, "Yep." So I can add a single new question. I can do a question group. We're going to call it subject 1. I can say how many questions I want to pick, how many points per question I want to do. So we'll say we'll pick one question. We're going to link it to a question bank. We're going to say it's subject 1 here. Perfect. It says questions will be pulled from the bank subject 01. Now what that means is that you can pick, if you've got 500 questions, you can pick 15 of them. They'll all be aligned to, they'll be randomly selected and all be aligned to the outcomes that you aligned with that question bank. So again, that's where that mastery score comes in. If they get, of course, I pick a number that I can't easily do math in my head. We'll say 10 questions. If you want them to have to get 7 out of 10 of those randomly selected questions correct, you pick 10 questions, you set that mastery level at 70%, and then you do it like this. So if I click Create Group, it says, it gives me a warning. I only have one question in that group. That's okay though. The other thing I can do is I can add another question group. We'll call it subject 02. We're going to link it to a question bank. We're going to link it to the correct bank there. Perfect. We'll pick another 10 questions from there. Awesome. Click Create Group. So Canvas is pretty smart as far as how this goes. It's going to group all of these questions into this individual group. I'm clicking on this 3/4 egg carton here because I can move these if I want to. And it's just going to pick from my banks. Now, even if I just create a new question, let's go ahead and do that real quick. And we're not actually going to put anything in here, multiple choice. And we're going to make this really hard to answer. Perfect. So if I update that question, you'll notice, so this is just a question by itself. We're going to go ahead and save this over here. Of course, it's going to take a minute. If I go back to quizzes and I go back to my question banks, you'll see that that question is automatically pulled into that question bank. Now, I can move this question. So let's say this belongs in subject 2. I can click move or copy this question. We're going to say move it there. Don't keep a copy. And we will move that to subject 2. Now you'll see unfiled questions is empty. If I go back out here, you can see that now I've got 2 questions in subject 2 and 1 in question 1. Hopefully that's helpful with putting outcomes with question banks. If you have more questions, don't hesitate to contact the CET 307-778-4363 or CET@lccc.wy.edu.